Welcome back into the Lions247 Podcast. We are back in our Happy Valley headquarters after a fantastic week out in Los Angeles for the Rose Bowl, which was just a phenomenal effort by Penn State. We had talked about it leading up to the matchup. What kind of a performance would we see after a lackluster display in the Outback Bowl last season, and the way they worked their way toward that completely different December and ultimately a 35-21 victory for the Nittany Lions over the Pac-12 champion Utah Utes. 11-2 finish. We covered a lot of ground on our earlier episode of the podcast this week, putting a recap and putting a bow on the Rose Bowl. About an hour of conversation for that one. We turned our attention toward 2023 about how this was a springboard of sorts. So circle back. That episode dropped on Tuesday morning from Lions247 Podcast. This time around, we're going to take a chance, come up for some air. We're back on the East, and we have some things to catch up on in the transfer portal, the recruiting trail, and who better to do that with than our very own Tyler Calvaruso. Tyler, you were holding it down with some basketball coverage as well, but we were out and concentrating on football at the Rose Bowl. Appreciate everything you were able to do, including keeping tabs on the transfer portal, which is really heating up right now for Penn State.
Yep, I was definitely kept busy. It was always a good thing, so we got a lot to get into today.
Yeah, I'd say you missed the beautiful sunshine and out there, but there was very little of it. Of course, we missed you. Hopefully, maybe get you out to a bowl game one of these days, but you did a stellar job. And let's start with the first news that surfaced. In fact, while I was on the plane out west was Storm Duck announcing that he will be committing to Penn State, arriving here in January. You've confirmed that both of these additions are coming in January, and we're starting with a defensive back who played a lot of football for North Carolina when healthy.
Yeah, we're talking about a player who would probably be getting ready for the NFL draft had he stayed healthy throughout his career at North Carolina. I think that's the kind of talent that Storm Duck has. He's a fit in Penn State's secondary in multiple ways. So he's around 6 foot, 200 pounds, really long. So he's good in coverage, uses his length to his advantage. And arguably, I would say the most impressive thing with Storm Duck is in run support. If you watch his tape, he hits like a safety. He's one of the tougher DBs coming out of the ACC last season. So I think Penn State is really going to love to add that to its secondary. A guy who can cover and a guy who's got absolutely no issue coming up to the line of scrimmage and making tackles, stopping the run. That's a big deal. He's a culture fit in that regard. And off the field, he was very well respected at North Carolina. I think that'll carry over to the Penn State locker room. Very quality get for the Nittany Lions. He's, replacing Joey Porter Jr., not easy, nearly impossible. I mean, we're talking about one of the better cornerbacks in program history, right? But Storm Duck, if he could stay healthy, he might not produce necessarily at Porter Jr.'s level, but he's going to contribute a similar impact. He could be that good in coverage when he's healthy and he's on his game. So expect to see a lot of him on the outside next season.
It's January 5th. The transfer portal postseason window opened exactly 1 month ago. From day one, we saw Penn State prioritize the cornerback position. There's been a bunch of names out there. A common theme, of course, along the way, Tyler, was that a lot of these guys were down to 1 year of eligibility, had played a lot of Power 5 football. From what you've gathered, why was this ultimately the right fit for Penn State? Because there were 4, 5, 6 names out there that we've kind of discussed.
Yeah, there have been a lot of names that we tossed around. Now, ironically, Duck wasn't really one of them. His future was kind of up in the air. There wasn't really a lot of buzz surrounding his recruitment, but nonetheless, he lands at Penn State. I just think from a skill set perspective, I think Duck has things that Terry Smith can work with and develop and really solidify Duck's place as an NFL cornerback, a guy who could get drafted next year, under a year of his tutelage. I mean, we've seen it time and time again what Terry Smith could do with some of these guys. And Duck has already produced at a high enough level. I mean, he was an all-ACC selection, second-team all-ACC selection this past season. So he's legit. He's a proven contributor, right? There's no real roll of the dice here. I mean, there is in the injury sense, but when it comes to skill and talent and just what he has shown on tape when he's on the field, he's legit. And the thing is, 2019 and 2020, when he was dealing with the injuries, it wasn't necessarily anything catastrophic that he was dealing with. It was just a lot of nagging things that tended to pile up and really hindered him and ultimately kept him off the field. So if he can avoid those things, I think Penn State is pretty confident that he can, because I don't think you take a player if you're worried about his injury history, right? Because especially a one-year player, there's not much time to, work around those injuries. You get him for that 1 year, whatever happens. So I feel Penn State felt comfortable with the medicals, everything that came along with that. They definitely felt comfortable with the player based on what they've seen on tape. So that combined with just what we touched on before about how he was respected at North Carolina, and he's a really, really tough football player. Penn State felt that he could be a guy who comes into that room and thrives on the field and in the locker room as well as a leader.
Storm Duck, a fantastic name, which we've covered
Very
already
good.
on the podcast, but out of Boiling Springs High School in South Carolina, he's a guy that's from that 2019 recruiting class that has meant so much to this cornerback room at Penn State. We had Keaton Ellis initially part of that group. He ends up as a starting safety for you. Joey Porter Jr. looks like he'll be the first round pick at cornerback out of Penn State. Marquise Wilson has played a ton of football. So has Daquan Hardy. They were all 2019 cornerbacks. Here comes another in Storm Duck to add reinforcements. And Tyler, I was speaking with defensive coordinator Manny Diaz ahead of the Rose Bowl out in Los Angeles. And the question I posed to him, because I can't ask directly about Storm Duck. He hasn't signed with the program, he hasn't joined the program, but I phrased it and said, if you were to prioritize adding a veteran cornerback to the roster this offseason, what would be the emphasis for doing so? Why would you be motivated to do that? And of course, he says they feel like they were able to accomplish a lot of their high points defensively this year because of their play at cornerback and their ability to trust guys on an island. And we've seen what Kalen King can do. I think the nation is starting to understand what the rising junior is going to be all about in 2023. Joey Porter Jr. had tremendous respect from everybody. I think Purdue week 1 was really the only team that went after him. Everybody else stayed away this season. And so I think you look at this unit, Johnny Dixon, what he's been able to accomplish in year 2 out of South Carolina. He's a guy that I think can really build his NFL draft stock with another year at Penn State. And quite frankly, he may already be in a position to consider making that jump. So, Tyler, I look around this room and I see, I don't see a need for a starter, but I see a need for reinforcements. You got Cam Miller, a freshman. You've got some really talented freshmen coming in with Zion Tracy, Elliott Washington. I think we both believe Washington could be a contributing factor as a true freshman. But this guy, Storm Duck, it makes you feel really good just because invariably you will have a guy get hurt in spring ball, or a guy get hurt in August, or a guy get hurt in the first play of the first game. They had really good health here for the most part. They had appendicitis flare up for Joey Porter Jr., and they were able to recover and get down to the tail end and play really well against a strong quarterback in Utah. So you look at the way they were able to weather some of those storms. I think you have every motivating circumstance if you're Terry Smith and if you're Manny Diaz to ensure that you're in a good spot, not just in those starting 2 or even the top 3 cornerbacks you're working with, but when you got to go 5, 6 deep over the course of your schedule. And Storm Duck's going to get here in January, so he'll have a real chance to exit spring ball as one of those guys. But let's face it, he's got his work cut out for him because this is a highly competitive room. We have some 2023 decisions to come. Dixon, Marquise Wilson, both those guys technically are seniors, but have that COVID eligibility. But I really like this pickup, and it's not necessarily a sense of urgency pickup, but that's what you'll find at wide receiver because that is where you say they need starters. They need guys who can go out, run a bunch of routes in 2023. And that's where the second commitment came from while we were out in Los Angeles.
Yeah, Devin Carter from NC State. So we talked a lot this offseason about Penn State's desire to get more explosive at wide receiver. And Taylor Stubblefield kind of touched on that during the early signing period, talking about how they wanted to go out, get a couple guys in the portal, get more explosive at the position, just become an overall deeper room, become a little bit more diverse of a room. And I think he might have had Carter in mind when he was saying that, because Carter brings a little something different to Penn State's wide receiver. And we're talking about a guy who's 6'4", 210, really physical downfield. I've talked about him a little bit when his name first popped up as a guy that I really liked as a fit at Penn State. Because I think you throw him on the outside, and we talked about this with Storm Duck just a few seconds ago, a guy who was produced in the ACC and has proven that when he's healthy and when he's on his game, he's going to make opponents pay. He's going to make plays, and he's going to get the job done. You put him on the outside, you give Drew Aller a guy who could just go downfield, you throw him a jump ball, he'll hard point it and win more often than not. I don't think you can really put a price on that and the impact that it will have on the Penn State offense next season. There's a lot of speed on that unit, yeah, sure, but now you got the big body on the outside who Mike Yurcich, I'm sure, is looking forward to using in a lot of different ways. I know sometimes at NC State, Carter had some issues with drops and such, but he kind of rectified that towards the end of his career with the Wolfpack. Battled injuries in his final season with the program, but came back at the end of the year, had a really strong showing against, granted, a poor North Carolina defense, but still, he got out there and got the job done after missing almost a month due to injury. Not a lot of rust there from him. And I think that game kind of showed the player that he could be as a vertical threat. So another addition that Penn State is really happy with, and a guy who I think, as long as he stays healthy, I think you're going to see some legitimate production out of him next season.
I'm glad you mentioned the size that he's going to add to the room, because when you review this 2022 roster at wide receiver, the only guy who's over 6'2" in the receiver room is Malik Mega. And to this point in his career, which is 3 years into to his time at Penn State, he has been a special teams factor more than an offensive factor. And I don't know if that's going to change next year. So you're bringing in a guy here, as you said, the size, proven commodity, nearly 2,000 receiving yards. Granted, it took him about 50 college games to get there. He doesn't have a ton of 100-yard games that he's racking up, but you've got a guy who has 2,000 yards receiving at the Power 5 football level in his career and brings that kind of size. There's a lot to like about that. And I know one thing that Taylor Stubblefield, and speaking with Mitchell Tinsley, in fact, who had his own one-and-done experience as a senior transfer, and that's what's shaping up for Carter here in 2023 in State College. Tinsley had to kind of check his ego and his maybe production ambitions at the door when he got to Penn State, coming from an offense that really threw the ball around as much as anybody last year in college football. And I know NC State certainly wasn't throwing the ball 70 times per game, but they had a hell of a quarterback in Devin Leary the last couple of years, a highly respected player right now who's looking for his home in the transfer portal. Yep. And I'd imagine that Carter, I think the expectation you set is that he comes in and that he's one of your top 3 or 4 receivers. When you get a guy in this situation, you're not looking at a developmental spot. You're not saying, let's work him in and hopefully he can be a contributing factor for us come October. He's getting here in January, as you've confirmed. He's going to get a lot of spring work with this new look quarterback room and guys who are getting their reps. And in a lot of ways, it's going to be interesting because you've had Sean Clifford gobble up so many first-team reps on the practice field. And, of course, Drew Aller and Poe Papula are getting a lot of run here late in the season after Christian Veillere transferred out. But you're going to see them running the offensive show, getting acclimated with new receivers. And in some ways here, it's up for grabs at receiver, because if you can be the guy who builds that chemistry, builds that rapport with the new starting quarterback, and you're the guy concentrating on working with him off the field, away from team facilities, putting yourself in a good spot when March arrives, when April closes, and eventually when August picks back up, I think it's going to be really fun to follow this. And the fact that Carter gets to campus in January is really, really important for a room that loses leadership in the form of Parker Washington and Mitchell Tinsley. And just you look around and you say, what have you done in a college game? What have you done in a college game? There's a lot of potential there, but there's just not a lot of proven variables.
There's not. And whether or not Carter wants, whether he starts 11, 12, 13, whatever the number is, whether he's a rotational piece, the fact of the matter is, it doesn't matter, because when you could add a player to your wide receiver rotation who just brings something so different to the table, it opens up the playbook. It opens up what a young quarterback can accomplish. It just raises the ceiling of the entire offense. And I think that was kind of on Penn State's mind as it went after Carter. There's been involvement with a lot of big-bodied receivers, but there's a reason that Carter was at the top of that list. They felt the most comfortable with him given what he has done against some high-level cornerbacks in the ACC. Ironically, Storm Duck being one of them. He's a quality player. You're bringing a quality player to the Big Ten for his final season in college football. It's a good fit. Another good fit. James Franklin always talks about fit. Hey, look, we're seeing it with these 2 transfer additions right here.
That'll be fun to when we get these guys in an interview setting and get to know them a little bit better with Storm Duck and with Carter, bringing up some of their past history, going back and forth against each other in the same conference. That'll be a fun storyline.
In-state rivals, too.
That's right. So they'll be teammates in 2023, but of course the work is not done yet for Penn State. You've got these 2 additions. They're going to be on campus really within a week or so, based on all understanding. And all of a sudden the new look Nittany Lions roll on and the Rose Bowl's further in the rearview mirror. But what else are we looking at wide receiver? I mean, we've got to go with the name that's been the headliner for the last few weeks on that target board with Dante Cephas out of Kent State. A bunch of Power 5 playoff contending kind of programs have been sniffing around, have extended offers, and yet here we are, start of January, no resolution, and it's tough to find one in the moment, it seems.
I don't think we're going to have one anytime soon either. I had a conversation regarding Cephas about maybe an hour ago, and it looks like it's getting to the point where the likely outcome is him heading back to Kent State. And here's why. He still has work to do when it comes to credits and being able to transfer and be eligible somewhere else. So it's seeming like a likely course of action could be him going back to Kent State, getting enough credits to graduate Kent State, and then hitting the portal later on again. And if that does happen, you're going to see the same players. I would say it's kind of a dangerous game. I mean, it's not one he really wants to be playing. That's kind of just the reality.
Oh, of course not.
Yeah,
no.
That's not the reality of the situation. It just kind of is what it is. But if he re-enters the portal in the spring, if that's what he ultimately decides that he needs to do for his future, he's going to have to cease contact with the coaches he's been talking to since he's been in the portal. He'll have to resume that in the spring. And then once the spring rolls around, what are the numbers games looking like for these programs? Penn State, Pittsburgh, UCLA, all the schools that have been involved with Cephas. Do they still have a spot for him? That's just something we're going to have to see. It's a unique situation, I would say. And, we talk about the whole transfer portal era being in a brave new world for us. So this is definitely a unique situation. I don't think we've ever really seen anything like this regarding a guy who's been in the portal, might have to go back to school to put himself in the best position, and then hit the portal again. So we'll be keeping a close eye on Cephas, as we have been for almost 2 months now. Feels like 2 months, at least. It might be just a month, but still, regardless of the timeline, there's been a lot of movement here. Kind of died down for a little bit, but there's more buzz coming out of that now. So we're just gonna have to see what happens and what his timeline actually winds up being.
Pretty fascinating stuff, and certainly no one would have anticipated if he ends up spending a spring semester back at Kent State. But as you said, it's a brave new world. We've seen guys circle back to their programs, but oftentimes that's at the Power 5 level. And so when we look ahead here a little bit, and we'll see what it looks like with Cephas. We'll continue to keep tabs on him. I'd imagine that whenever he is able to make this move, whether it's now or down the road a little bit, he'll have plenty of suitors. He's inside the top 10 in 24/7 Sports transfer rankings right now. And just a reminder out there, Chop Robinson, he didn't even put his name in the transfer portal last year until March, and ultimately joined the program in the summer. So not everybody's climbing into the portal right after the regular season, right after bowl season. Got to have some patience, and sometimes there are extending circumstances that are beyond the football field that we don't always know. But we appreciate the reporting from you, Tyler, and we'll keep track on that. Other wide receivers here: Romello Brinson, former Miami player. He's got a connection with Manny Diaz. I remember his name popping up on Penn State's target board a few years back, and this is a guy who has quickly reciprocated that interest.
Yeah, his obviously goes without saying his high school recruitment was before my time from a Penn State perspective, but Florida kid from Miami Northwestern. I do recall Penn State, we're just reading about Brinson's recruitment back in the day, going through ever since he hit the portal, that Penn State was interested, but, Florida kid, get him to campus. He winds up staying home, commits to Miami to play for Manny Diaz, and now he's looking for a new home. And could he reunite with Diaz in Happy Valley? Seems entirely possible. Started the official visit on Wednesday. Word is that's gone pretty well. So I think that relationship combined with Penn State's just desire. We just talked about Carter being a bigger guy. Brinson's by no means small, but he's more of the electric variety, right? He's not really the big vertical threat that Carter is. He's more, you get him the ball, he could beat you over the top with his speed for sure, no doubt, but you get him the ball, over the middle, let him go make some plays. He's got some soft hands, some good route running ability. Penn State likes that about him. So another kind of wait and see game now, depending on how that official visit plays out. I believe he's still going to take other visits as well. I don't think he's necessarily in a rush to wrap this up. But right now, Penn State, between the relationships and just the overall fit in the offense, I think it's a pretty solid spot the Nittany Lions are in. But again, we'll see.
I think it's fair to categorize this as a different wide receiver target right now for them in the transfer portal, because he is a 2021 recruit. He's been at the college level for 2 years. So whoever lands him next, you're basically looking at a significant chunk of his college career available to you to mold him, to build him, to work him into your offensive plans. This year, 7 catches, 99 yards, no scores. So this is more of a speculative pickup, I suppose you could put it that way, versus someone who would be seemingly plug and play based on their Power 5 experience. Sorting through some of these names, there's other guys of that variety. And I wanted to go to Marquise Montgomery, who's a junior college player, caught somewhere in between high school and his path to the Power 5. High school ball out in Hawaii, plays junior college at Snow College, and now teams are kind of clamoring around this kid.
Yeah, caught up with Montgomery a little bit earlier today. He originally, when I talked to him last week, he was looking to maybe visit Penn State this week. I'm not really sure that's going to happen at this point. He told me he hasn't heard from the Penn State staff about that visit coming together. So I'll be in touch with him moving forward. That's another situation we'll be keeping really close tabs on. But as of right now, it does not look like he'll be making it to campus this weekend.
A couple more names here at the wide receiver position. As we were going through it before the podcast, it's just a deep list right now. And a guy that turned some heads with a new offer out of Bowling Green from Penn State, Tyrone Bradone. I don't know if I'm saying that last name correctly. I apologize. It sounds cool. 6'7" wide receiver target.
32 catches, 506 yards, 7 touchdowns this past season. And usually those kinds of numbers don't get ingrained in my head. But when we're talking about a 6'7" wide receiver with that kind of catch radius, and if you go on Google Images and look at some of the pictures of him making one-handed grabs and stuff like that, it's kind of a hard name to forget. And his numbers are pretty hard to forget too for me. I really like him. We just talked about Carter being a big body threat. I mean, geez, man, bro, that's next level at 6'7". That's a completely different ballgame. You line those two guys up on the outside. Best of luck to those smaller DBs. They might have a tough day. But no, he's looking to make it to Penn State this weekend. That visit is in the works. We're going to see if he gets finalized. That's been the word since yesterday. So there seems to be some mutual interest there pretty early with that offer going out.
One more name in the transfer portal for now. There might be another one that pops up at wide receiver by the time we finish recording here, TC. But Jamari Thrash out of Georgia State paying a visit to Auburn, and Penn State also on his radar.
Penn State really just jumped in yesterday. So that's a new name, new fresh name. They seem to be popping up every day, and Thrash is the latest. Really, really productive player at Georgia State. 61 catches this past season. Pretty good. Pretty good receiver if you go watch his film. Another guy who could do a lot of different things for you. He's a good route runner, good hands. He's got the vertical ability. He showed it throughout his career at Georgia State. Just over 100 career catches in a few years with the program, over 1,000 receiving yards, healthy amount of touchdowns. Intriguing name. Now, I'm not sure he necessarily jumps to the top of the board with this offer coming in, with some guys who have already visited. But if he gets to campus, what do we always say? Completely different ballgame. Get a guy to Penn State. It's a pretty clear indication of where the staff likes a guy. So we'll see if Thrash makes it to Happy Valley. If he does, I have a feeling we'll be talking about him a lot more because he's a pretty damn good player.
We just covered, half dozen guys who have experience at the college level, junior college all the way up to Power 5, a couple years all the way up to 4 years. When you review this group, and I have my own opinion on it, but I want to hear yours first. Do you see a guy who could come in and be wide receiver 1 for Penn State? Keandre Lambert-Smith's the internal candidate to be that guy. He finished the season on a high note, but he's got a lot to prove till anybody's putting all their eggs in that basket. A lot of young talent around him. Harrison Wallace did some things. Leon Clifford did some things. A bunch of freshman eligible players. They need some kind of wide receiver 1. It's not an easy thing to just go say, hey, I want this, I'm going to get it. Everybody would love a lot of things in the transfer portal. When you review this list, do you see someone with that potential?
Cephas, but like I said, with all the moving parts there, will it happen? Because when he visited, Penn State's pitch to him was pretty much, hey, look, you could come in and be our top guy. You could be our wide receiver 1. You could be on the receiving end of the bulk of Drew Allar's targets. That was legitimately the pitch to him. So Penn State sees that ability, and who am I to argue with what that staff sees? I mean, their talent evaluating abilities are pretty clearly proven at this point. So if they're pitching him as a number 1, it's hard to argue against him in being a potential number 1 target at a Power 5 school. And that's not really a knock on the other guys per se, right? It takes a lot to be a number 1 wide receiver. You have to deal with a lot of different things to earn wide receiver 1 status. You got to be able to handle another team's top corner week in and week out and produce at a high level. Can Brinson be that player with a little bit of development? Maybe. Can our guy from Bowling Green be that guy? You don't know because he's a MAC player. How's he going to adjust to the Big Ten? Things of that nature. Yeah. And Thrash, another thing, another group of 5 player who, yes, he was a wide receiver 1 at his respective school. And so was Mitch Tinsley at Western Kentucky before he came to Penn State. But how does he translate? Not everyone's Mitch Tinsley, Yeah. So it's a game you got to play. But if there was one who really stands out to me, I'd have to say Cephas. I think we've seen it from him the most. He's gotten the job done at Kent State against Power 5 opponents in non-conference play. So really hard to argue against that name as my pick.
Yeah, the dude has a 1,200-yard season on his resume. And
80 catches,
Yeah, so I'm with you there. I think that Cephas is the one that you can say, even without seeing him on the practice field, without seeing him interact with the team, where looks like he could slide in as that top receiver target for you. The other guys, I mean, we probably have to recalibrate what we're thinking about with wide receiver 1 for Penn State, because in the last couple of years, not including 2022, when this offense was really searching for an identity, wide receiver 1 meant Jahan Dotson going up with gaudy numbers, working his way toward first-round status in the NFL draft. This year, wide receiver one was a very different outlook because you've had a bounce back season from your tight end room where 3 guys are getting fed. 2 of them are starting and playing a bunch of football. You've got 2 freshman running backs combining for about 2,000 rushing yards, 25 total touchdowns. You look at the stats from last season and the year before that on the ground, pales in comparison. Not even, you wouldn't think you're covering the same program. So naturally those wide receiver numbers drop, and Mitchell Tinsley, discussed that out in the bowl game and going from a pass happy offense where he was fed all time to where, hey, Sean Clifford's looking in his direction. There are key moments, 3rd down pickups, a touchdown in the Rose Bowl. I just think we also have to say you're not necessarily looking for a receiver to come in and put up 1,200 yards, 75 catches and 10 touchdowns for you, because the way this offense finished the year, I don't think that's necessarily what you need. Sure, if you get a guy over 1,000 yards receiving, that means you did something right in the offensive attack. But right now, I think it's also maybe a spot where if a wide receiver one kind of candidate looks at the stat sheet from this year, they may have a moment of hesitancy because you don't know what guys are prioritizing. Are they prioritizing being a missing piece for a championship team, or are they prioritizing, being a Biletnikoff Award winner and catching a ton of passes and putting their name in the NFL draft with that kind of a season behind them? So a lot to work our way through, Tyler. You've done a great job with the wide receiver group because it changes so much. The last guy we got to finish with here is from the high school level. And of course, that's where Penn State has their one commitment or one signee in this class from wide receiver is the high school product in Carmelo Taylor out of Virginia. He won't be on campus until the summer, projecting it as a smaller statured speed receiver threat. So when we talk about the size, that's a nice counterbalance there. Let's finish the conversation with the latest 2023 high school target, Derek English. And whenever anybody's getting offered by Penn State after the early signing period, you've got to focus on that offer because it means something to this staff. And he's a guy out of Saguaro High School down in Arizona. And I think we both remember Christian Kirk being an absolute baller down there at the wide receiver spot.
So, Rashad, it's funny you mentioned about an offer going out this late in the cycle and the importance of that. Rashad Rich told English when he offered him, we normally don't issue these kinds of offers this late in the cycle for a high school kid, but we're liking what we see out of you. And I can understand why. English he has a very interesting story, man. So, he was a top 24/7 prospect as a sophomore. He wasn't just a top 24/7 guy. He was a top 150 guy. Then he transfers high schools as a junior. Has to sit out his first 5 games per Arizona transfer rules. Winds up tearing his ACL in his first game of his junior year. Obviously misses the rest of the season. Comes back for his senior year, hoping to, kind of reclaim his spot to being one of the better wide receiver prospects on the West Coast. And it's another year where he doesn't suffer the major injury like the ACL, but he's dealing with a lot of nagging injuries that caused him to miss some games. And really, if you look at his high school tape as an upperclassman, he only has 7 games under his belt, which is a real shame because it has prevented schools from evaluating him. It has prevented him from getting the camps. It has prevented him from putting up verified testing numbers, and that has definitely hurt his recruitment. And the transfer portal has also kind of hindered his process as well. He was telling me when we spoke that he was talking to Power 5 programs, but they wound up filling up through the portal. And he's kind of, he's in a tough spot right now. And he's very happy that Penn State came calling. And I think that's regardless of circumstance. He seems to be really high on the Nittany Lions. Told me he wants to make it to campus as soon as possible. Now, with a lot of moving pieces at wide receiver, will that visit come to fruition? We'll have to see who winds up being a take, who doesn't wind up being a take, who wants to play at Penn State and who doesn't among the transfers. But from what I've heard, this can wind up as a completely separate pursuit compared to the transfer portal situations because we talked about Romello Brinson being a guy you could come in and develop for a few years. I mean, English would have full eligibility. So there's a difference between going out and getting a vet, and there's guys like English, late in the cycle, late bloomers, full eligibility. You get them from day one, you develop them. And English has traits. I know the film's not really there, but he has the traits of a Power 5 receiver. Like, there's a reason that we had him so highly rated as an underclassman. He's 6 foot. He's grown into a 6'4" frame. He's 210 pounds. He's a physical player. Another guy who could really go up and get it at a high level, just not a lot of tape to back up that line of thinking. And Penn State being willing to take the chance this late in the cycle, I can think it speaks to the staff trusting in its evaluation. I know there's been a lot of talk about, Penn State hasn't gotten this guy out of the portal. Caden Prather just went to Maryland. Guys like him, they didn't get this guy, they didn't get that guy, so now we're offering someone like English. No, that's not the case. the fact of the matter is the staff likes this guy, regardless of who they've gotten out of the portal. Granted, there would be less spots if they were filled up at wide receiver, but English is liked, and he's highly regarded by the staff. Again, not the most known commodity right now, but a commodity who could probably come in and contribute. I'll tell you the one thing, man. He's going to have a chip on his shoulder wherever he lands. He wants to prove to people that, like, just because I missed a couple years, I still got it. I'm still a baller, and I can produce at this level, and I'm going to go show you. That's the kind of mindset he has. So I really like him. And regardless of whether or not it's Penn State for him, I'm going to be very interested to see how his college career plays out. You always got to kind of root for a guy like that.
A couple of I guess not necessarily recent with Daquan Hardy, but Daquan Hardy got the offer very late in the process in the winter of leading up to his signing day. He's played a ton of football for Penn State. Vega Ioane is a guy I've referenced here in the past. Really an ascending figure for Penn State on the offensive interior. He was an opportunity to visit cross country last January. He ends up signing, leaving his home in Washington State. So it has happened. This obviously you've got to work through some of the logistics here, which is playing catch up with a guy who lives in Arizona. That's not the easiest process to do. It requires some trust on both sides, particularly when Penn State staff is giving the green light to themselves, it sounds like, to at least put out that offer and explore a player who hasn't done much on the football field the last couple of seasons. So really a compelling offer. I'm going to be curious to see how it develops with English. And at this stage, we've got Carter now on board for 2023 as a transfer. Mention the fact that you've got Carmelo Taylor signed, sealed, and delivered. He'll show up in the summer. What is the size of this wide receiver class when the dust settles? Do we think it's 3? Do we think it's 4? How many more additions?
I could see really anywhere between 1 and 2. And entering this offseason, it kind of seemed like Penn State could just, take 2 guys out of the portal and kind of call it a day at 3. But I think with the English offer going out, and I do think that some of these more recent wide receiver offers through the portal, I think the staff is open to adding a 3rd guy if it could find the right fit. I don't think the door is shut on that possibility. It's been kicked around, it seems. So I would say 3 to 4. I'm leaning 3. That would be my guess right now. That's just kind of more of a gut feeling than anything else. But I wouldn't be shocked if 4 happens. Again, if the staff likes a guy and they have a spot for him, why not roll the dice? Wide receiver is a position Penn State not only wants to get more talented at and more explosive at, they want to get deeper at. They want that quality depth. They want to compete for a national title. And the best teams in the country have depth that, in the event of a rash of injuries, you can run guys out there who could go play at all those other schools that you're competing with. There's no drop off in talent. There's no concern about, can this guy handle the responsibilities of having ample passes thrown his way in a game in a big spot. The better the depth, the better off you are as a program. And I think Penn State's going for that right now. That could open the door to 4 potentially. But if I had to pick, I would say 3.
I'm glad you brought up the depth because it's so vital in the defensive line on an annual basis. PJ Mustipher has been a stalwart for the program. He's moving off to the NFL after the Rose Bowl. And then, the other news that surfaced here before we sat down and did the podcast, and I'm amazed it took this long, like 70 hours after the Rose Bowl kicked off. We didn't get our first roster move until just now. It's Fatoma Mulba, defensive tackle, redshirt sophomore, played involved as a reserve, involved on special teams, a guy that through 3 seasons on campus decided he wants to check out other options. So he'll move on. Not a guy that we were projecting as a big piece in 2023, but certainly a depth piece. And that's an area, the defensive interior, that Penn State remains focused on. Talk us through what's gone on, because there's been a miss. There's been a top list, and then there's another name to know. So let's start with the miss.
Yeah, so Quinchell Jamison-Travis from junior college ranked Iowa Western just won a national title. So shout out to him for that. Won a national title, wound up signing with Auburn. He was a guy Penn State really liked to replace PJ Mustipher on the interior. But you win some, you lose some, and now Penn State's really back on the trail again. Devon Sears is a guy they really like, Texas State transfer. They're hoping to get him on campus this weekend for a visit. He's a priority top prospect. Rondell Bothroyd from Wake Forest, a guy he's been uberly productive for the Demon Deacons, veteran. He's looking to make it to campus this weekend. So they lost one, but they've got their eye on a couple quality ones right now.
And you mentioned the Wake Forest commit,
Yeah.
transfer, I should say, and Rondell Bothroyd, a guy we're monitoring for transfer positions. Is this the spot on the field we're focused in now? I mean, clearly we're focused on wide receiver. If anyone's been listening to this episode, they're aware of that. Does it feel like if there's another spot that we gotta, just keep locked in on? Is it that interior defensive line?
I would say so. Because again, we talk about depth of wide receiver. I would say depth in the trenches is even more important. Just the assortment of bodies you have to go through throughout the course of a season, and injuries always tend to pile up. And the better players you have on the defensive line and on the offensive line, likewise, the better off you are, and the more likely you are to hang on throughout the course of a season. So these two guys, they're definitely important names, especially Sears. I would say it seems like Sears is at the top of the board. He's coming off a visit to Oklahoma that went really well, but if he makes it out to Penn State, I think there's a pretty good chance there for the Nittany Lions.
You said Oklahoma, Tennessee, Penn State there for Sears. Across the trenches here, Tyler, I wanted to finish up in terms of targets with Chimdi Ono, a guy out of Maryland, 4-star prospect. Brian Doan has a story up here on Thursday afternoon about his Final Four. It's Rutgers, Penn State, Michigan State out of the Big Ten alongside Ole Miss. Formerly committed to Old Dominion, decommitted prior to that early signing period, made an official visit to Rutgers. Wasn't enough for him to sign with them back in December. And now here he is. He's got an opportunity to make the rounds. He's expected here at Penn State this month. Just quickly, what do you make of the process with Chimdi? Because James Franklin pointed to the offensive tackle position on signing day as one of those remaining spots they would like to address between now and when they get back on the practice field come spring.
Yeah, so he just dropped that top 4 with Penn State being involved, and I would say Penn State's in a pretty prominent place on that list. He's looking forward to getting to campus. I'd say the Nittany Lions have done some – Phil Trotwin specifically has done some really good work with him, and he's a late bloomer, but another guy with traits that the Penn State staff really likes and thinks they could develop. Now it'll be interesting when he gets to Michigan State and Ole Miss. What are the pitches from those schools, right? In terms of NIL and, what they could offer in terms of really playing time that maybe Penn State necessarily can't. But the fact of the matter is Penn State's put itself in a pretty good spot here. And you see a guy like Ono, yes, he would technically be a late cycle flyer. I'm well aware of that, but he's still a 4-star prospect. There aren't many better recruits out there right now. That's just the fact of the situation. He's an intriguing recruit. He's had the staff's eye for a while, and I think this could definitely come together for Penn State, depending on how it plays out.
It seems like the view here is you're catching an interesting offensive line prospect on the upswing. A guy who was the Maryland State champion in shot put and discus, did plenty on his senior film to convince Power 5 schools and to convince our rankings council that he was worthy of a longer look. And now here he is, trying to sprint to the finish line with all these visits. As previously reported at Lions247, he's going to be on campus next weekend. We'll talk about that weekend in just a moment with you, Tyler, before we wrap up the podcast. But he plans on finishing out his travel itinerary down at Ole Miss on the weekend of January 27th, leading up to the signing day, the classic one, that first Wednesday in February. So keep tabs on him. The other offensive lineman that we know will be on board with Penn State, Javen Williams, down in San Antonio, Texas this week for the for the All-American Bowl, the Under Armour All-American game down in Orlando. But Javen Williams having that opportunity to finish out his career, validate that 5-star status that 247 Sports has anointed him with pretty recently. And it sounds like he is one of those top performers among that offensive line group, a guy who will be joining the roster here for the Nittany Lions in a matter of days. Yeah.
So down in San Antonio, I would say the biggest thing with Williams is he played in a run-heavy offense at Wyomissing. A lot of power eye, line up, run the ball down your throat. And there weren't a lot of instances where he would have to pull to the second level and things like that, right? That's been kind of the general feeling. So a lot of people down there were interested to see how he would do in that regard. And while he's kind of had to adjust to the level of competition, that kind of goes without saying. I mean, we're talking about Pennsylvania high school football versus some of the best players in high school football down there in San Antonio for the All-American Bowl. So that's kind of a given. But a bunch of positive reviews once he got comfortable with that level of competition. And you see the athleticism. You see his ability to pull to the second level, man. I mean, you watch some of this tape. My goodness. I mean, the things that he could do for a man that size.
He looks like a jumbo fullback roaming down the field. It's really impressive. Yeah.
He moves that fluidly. He's that athletic. And I think the Penn State staff, they're going to get their eyes on that tape now that the Rose Bowl's over and they can kind of focus on the future. And they're going to see that. And they're going to be like, holy crap, we got this kid coming to campus real soon. Man, let's get to work with him because he could be a guy really, really soon. So really excited to see what Williams does at Penn State. Been excited for a while, but I feel like me personally, I think maybe even more so after this weekend in San Antonio, because for him to go down there and establish himself as a top performer among some of the best players in the country kind of speaks volumes. I mean, you go from Pennsylvania ball to that and still be able to hold your own. It's a bright future.
It's very difficult to look good as an offensive lineman in those settings too, because it's so much one-on-one work against elite defensive linemen who have the fast, and you're working in space against guys with speed. You're not working next to a guard. You don't have a tight end chipping next to you. So it's really tough to look good in that kind of a showcase setting. And Steve Wiltfong, national recruiting director here for 247 Sports, has a story up about Javen Williams, not just his personal goals, but wants to win a national championship, and he joins a growing list of Nittany Lions, whether they're going to be incoming or they're going to be sticking around from the 2020 team, that really seem to be saying we're a national championship team moving forward. So Javen Williams is going to add to that. He's going to play tackle to begin his career. So is Alex Birchmeyer, and then Anthony Donko going to be adding to the guard group. That's the plan for semester one, which begins for all three of those guys just this upcoming week as early enrollees. Let's lay out the landscape a little bit before we say goodbye, Tyler, because January, no more football games to cover, and there is a ton to sort through. We're going to see more guys like Fatoma Mulba decide that the time is right for them to explore their options, put their name in, leave the Penn State roster. And, of course, we're going to see Penn State roster influx from the transfer portal, from the recruiting trail. And looking a little bit long-term here as well in January with the junior day. Let's start with this weekend and then get to next weekend. Beginning with the transfers.
Oh, yeah, portal emphasis. Kind of like we have been on this podcast. I would say we've had a nice little portal emphasis. So that's going to carry over into the weekend. So you're going to see guys getting, Sears, the Bowling Green guy, whose name, Tyrone Broden. There we go. I don't know why it escaped me for a second after I spent like a half hour yesterday watching his tape. I love the stats so much I forgot the name. But so this weekend's going to be more portal focused, getting the transfers on campus. And then next weekend, you're going to have a junior day. Guys like Duke Watson, running back from Georgia, who really, really likes Penn State. I've written on him a bunch. I think if there's a spot for him in this class when it's all said and done, I think he's going to pounce on that. I think he really likes the Nittany Lions that much at this point. And we got some offensive line from Texas coming up. It's going to be – I don't want to go out and say star-studded just yet because the list is still coming together, but I think Penn State's going to be starting off January with a pretty impressive group of 2024s in Happy Valley.
I mean, it is helpful when you can probably throw that Rose Bowl champion moniker on your mail, I guess emails or whatever you're saying now. Graphics, I'm dating myself with acting like they put things in envelopes much anymore. But the fact that you finished the season with win number 11, you did it on a grand stage, what was the most watched non-playoff game of the postseason in college football, and you did it really emphatically. It wasn't a game you messed around with much. That's going to carry over. We always say don't read too much into one game, the result of one game, and I'm still sticking with that. But there's something to be said for showing up to a campus a couple weeks after they pick up a huge win in a setting like that. There's a palpable buzz around team facilities. They got that shiny new trophy. They're going to show you highlights from that matchup. There's a lot of ways that Penn State can make that work for them. And I fully anticipate that come next weekend, that junior day is going to be a pretty significant event. You mentioned some non-regional guys coming to campus, which is always big. You're trying to set the stage for official visits. But I think really I think that we're going to see a swell in that guest list from within the region. And I know that you'll be on top of it. Brian Doan's going to be contributing leading up to next weekend. Just to emphasize, not this weekend, but next weekend is that junior day. So 2024 prospects really going to step into the spotlight. You want to follow along the site for that. We'll follow up on a bit more of that on a podcast next week. But this weekend is the transfer portal. We'll be all over it again. And who knows? I mean, Penn State, if you have ambitions to be on campus in January, this weekend is everything, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it is, because you're kind of getting down to the nitty-gritty of filling out your roster for 2023 at this point. And I know there's going to be a second wave of guys hitting the portal in the spring and, just coming out of bowl season. And there's still going to be opportunities to add for sure. And like you touched on Chop Robinson earlier, he didn't wind up at Penn State until the summer. And look what he was able to accomplish this past season. So it's not the end-all be-all if you're on campus, for spring practices. It's not the end-all be-all if you're not enrolled at Penn State by the end of this month. It's It's not the end of the world, but it is paramount because the more time you get in the scheme, the better off you are, the more comfortable you are, the more time you get in the weight room with the strength and conditioning program, the more of a chance you have at being where the Penn State staff wants you to be come time to suit up for fall camp. That's just the facts of the situation. The longer you're around, the better off you're going to be just from an experience and comfortability factor. So it's an important weekend. It definitely is. And I think we're going to have some more important weekends like that too. But this one, when it comes to the immediate outlook of next year's roster, very, very important considering some of the names we've talked about who could be making it to campus. I keep circling back to Sears. I'd really, really keep an eye on him. I know the staff likes him. They need to replace PJ Mustipher, and they feel that he's the guy who could do that.
Yeah, and it's a spot that you're looking toward recruiting. You've got a guy that really like in Tyreek Blanding, but he's got some filling out to do physically. I don't think it would be fair to assume he's going to show up from day one and be ready to burn red shirt, much less, quote unquote, replace PJ Mustipher. So to this point, that's what your addition is at that position. Some work to be done there. Tyler, always appreciate you hopping on the podcast, providing some insight. It's a busy time of the year. We're back from the Rose Bowl. Going to do our best to support what you're doing, and we'll get back at it next week with you on another episode of the podcast. But of course, between now and then, folks can find you at Lions247.com.
Looking forward to being back, man. I'm sure we'll have a lot to cover on that one too.
We always do. Take care, man. All right, Tyler Calvaruso, Daniel Gallen making his way back from Southern California today. Mark Brennan and myself back here in Happy Valley. Thanks for following our coverage at the Rose Bowl throughout this past week. And Tyler Calvaruso, as I mentioned along the way, keeping you updated at Lions247.com on the recruiting trail, on the transfer portal. Brian Doan, of course, with a fresh story. Steve Wiltfong from San Antonio. All hands on deck all the time at Lions247.com. Quick shout out to everyone who's been following this podcast, whether you hopped on board this season or for several years you've been listening to our conversations here, back-to-back years where we clear 1 million audio downloads. Really proud of that. Our YouTube episodes are up 60% in views here in 2022. So as we begin 2023, just want to put out that word. Really, we can't do it without our listeners, without the viewers. We do have that YouTube channel that we want to continue to build. But if you've just been listening to us on car rides and not even taking a peek at any single video, really appreciate you too. For everyone here at Lions247.com, that's going to do it for this episode. We got a lot going on behind the scenes for our VIP subscribers. You can join now, 30% off an annual subscription or $1 for 1 month to take a test run of Lions247.com. We're pretty confident you'll like what you see. Stepping aside for now, I'm Tyler Donohue. We'll be back with another episode of the Lions247 Podcast very soon.